When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, when you look at that beautiful formation, I do feel it's much better for Canada.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
The argument over Canadian sovereignty continued at the very heart of American power, as Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump met face-to-face to try to reset the Canada-U.S. relationship. That meeting happening just a few hours ago in the Oval Office in the White House here in Washington, D.C., where we are broadcasting this special edition of Power and Politics. And where the president greeted the prime minister warmly for their first official meeting since Trump launched his trade war, disrupting the long-standing relationship between Canada and its closest ally. The tension is obvious, but their meeting began with kind words.
Really want to congratulate him. Probably one of the greatest comebacks in the history of politics, and I think Canada chose a very talented person, a very good person.
The praise aside, Trump didn't back down on tariffs, repeating his claim the U.S. doesn't need anything from Canada.
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is.
Trump says the tariffs stay. Carney says so does the border. Public disagreement over Trump's belief Canada should be the 51st state.
Well, I still believe that, but you know, takes two to tango, right?
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
But never say never. Never say never.
Prime Minister Carney is now leaving the U.S. Capitol after what he calls constructive talks, the beginning of a process of redefining the Canada-U.S. relationship.
This is the point at which a serious discussion begins. I look forward, not back, and I think we established a good basis today.
Hi there, I'm David Cochrane coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We have lots on the go today. We're going to hear from U.S. lawmakers on the state of the Canada-U.S. relationship and from Canadians in Washington pushing for an end to Trump's trade war. And of course, the Power Panel will react to today's high-stakes meeting. There's a lot to get to, and the first item up for bids is going to be the CBC's Katie Simpson. She is standing by outside the White House, where she has been in a cat-like state of readiness all day. So, Katie, what stood out to you as some of the key moments from this meeting today?
You know, going into a meeting like this, there's so much potential for disaster that it can completely warp expectations for what might be good or what might be, seen as a victory, because Donald Trump is so volatile. Donald Trump is so unpredictable. And some of the events we've seen in the Oval Office have deteriorated to really uncomfortable, moments. And so that was sort of the biggest concern, the biggest fear for the Canadian delegation heading in. However, the goal there was to have a respectful conversation. And we certainly saw Donald Trump offer more respect to Prime Minister Mark Carney than he did to Carney's predecessor, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He was very complimentary. There was warm handshakes. He even laughed at one of Mark Carney's jokes. And so there really seemed to be a dynamic where there was more respect there. But at the same time, even though the tone and the delivery may have changed, it doesn't mask the underlying tension in that Canada-U.S. relationship. And throughout the course of this event in the Oval Office, we saw Donald Trump reiterating his long-standing grievances about the Canada-U.S. relationship when it comes to trade, when it comes to military cooperation, Canada's defense spending, all of those irritants that Donald Trump has really been going after ever since he was reelected. And so the main irritant, though, or the main point of tension that has upset so many Canadians, they see it as a non-starter, is Trump's claims that Canada should be the 51st state. And even though the tone may have not been as harsh as we've heard from Donald Trump in some of these direct confrontation situations, he still tried to make the case that it would be to Canada's benefit to join the United States.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to get your response to this too. But Mr. President, you have said that Canada should become the 51st state. Were you joking?
No. Well, I still believe that, but takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages, but it would be a massive tax cut. And it's also a beautiful, as a real estate developer, I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. When you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said, that's the way it was meant to be. But, I do feel it's much better for Canada. But we're not going to be discussing that unless somebody wants to discuss it. I think that there are tremendous benefits to the Canadian citizens, tremendously lower taxes, free military, which honestly we give you essentially anyway because we're protecting Canada if you ever had a problem. But I think it would really be a wonderful marriage because it's two places that get along very well. They like each other a lot.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace, that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. And we have done that in the past. And part of that, as the President just said, is with respect to our own security. And my government is committed for a step change in our investment in Canadian security and our partnership. And I'll say this as well, that the President has revitalized international security, revitalized NATO, and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part of it.
And they have, I must say, Canada is stepping up the military participation because Mark knew, they were low and now they're stepping it up, and that's a very important thing. But never say never. Never say never.
So that, of course, is the big sort of moment that happened in the Oval Office. But there's so much more that took place inside the West Wing that is really going to sort of drive how this relationship goes forward. Mark Carney, in that moment, it's clear that, he was prepared for the possibility, the very likelihood that that was going to come up, and had a response that was ready to go that hopefully the President would sort of relate to by saying, look, there are places that just aren't for sale. Look at the White House where we are right here. Something that he's not going to be able to argue with right there. But there are so many other things that came out of this entire meeting, the public aspect of it, and it comes down to what are the things that are going to be tangible going forward. The 51st state thing, Canadians have made it abundantly clear that that is a non-starter. It is not going to be happening, and they get very angry and irritated and agitated when Donald Trump keeps saying it over and over and over again. But that is an issue that is a really sore point in the Canada-U.S. relationship. But it's not something that's necessarily going to change. What's going to change is, will this new tone between the United States and Canada, will this tone between Carney and Trump, will it foster an ability for there to be conversations, respectful dialogue related to trade, to get the relationship on a path toward what it traditionally has been, to work on cooperation, to find solutions to the irritants that are in that trading relationship. Those are the kinds of things that are going to change. Mark Carney today at his press conference saying he feels like there was progress, or it was constructive on that front. He said he's going to be talking to Donald Trump in the next few weeks, and that officials will continue their conversations, and that's the place where we might actually see some change. However, it's not going to come immediately. Trump himself said it, that he was asked about, are the tariffs going to come off? He's like, nope, and that's just the way it's going to be. That is the thing that Canada wants the most in this moment. But again, it's about getting a pathway to get there. It's going to be a long process, and that's what was on display in the White House today.
Yeah, and Katie, just Donald Trump spoke a little while ago at a FIFA announcement where he said the meeting went very well. He had a good meeting, no tension. We want to do what's right for our respective peoples, and that's what's going to happen. He took a shot at Justin Trudeau, and he said that Mark Carney is a big step up. It's a good step up for Canada. So there you go. That's the change in tone. Katie, lots more to talk about. We're going to see you a little bit later in the show. You're going to join us on the Power Panel. It's the CBC's Katie Simpson here in Washington. Look, we want to show you another exchange from the Oval Office today. A reporter asked Donald Trump whether the current trade deal was dead. Both President Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney responded. Have a listen.
Is USMCA dead?
No, it was actually very effective, and it's still very effective, but people have to follow it. So, you know, that's been a problem. People haven't followed it.
It is a basis for a broader negotiation. Some things about it are going to have to change. And part of the way you've conducted these tariffs has taken advantage of existing aspects of USMCA. So it's going to have to change. There's other elements that are come, and that's part of what we're going to discuss.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says this is just the first of many discussions over the coming weeks. Officials next, and then face-to-face again at the G7 in Kananaskis. Joining me now is Goldie Hyder, President of the Business Council of Canada, who happens to be in Washington, D.C. You've been meeting with a lot of people here in Washington over the last couple of days. We saw a respectful tone, but Trump still said he doesn't want a lot of Canadian goods, and all they've agreed to is more talks. How do you rank the outcome of today?
Well, I think it's a very good start for the reasons you've already been talking about. It's a reset, and we know that when it comes to the Canadian and the U.S. relationship, it is really at the top. The tone gets set at the top. The most successful one in our lifetime, Brian Mulroney, Ronald Reagan's a great example of that. Clearly, the former Prime Minister and the President had some issues from a chemistry perspective. On the upside, that's not there with Prime Minister Carney, so it gives us reason to hope, because for businesses, all we've been talking about for the last 2 days here, something's got to give. Mm-hmm. This uncertainty cannot last. Mm-hmm.
Well, but it can't, you would think, if you apply rational business and economic analysis to it, yet here we are, right? I mean, the President was saying things in the Oval Office today about $9 trillion of investment being brought in because of the tariffs. We're not really seeing that kind of action. And yet, you know, Mark Carney left here with a promise for officials to meet, and then I guess a commitment that Donald Trump is coming to the G7 where they talk face-to-face, which is better than a blow-up, right? But still, for the foreseeable future, the tariffs remain. What has to happen in the next couple of
weeks? As I said, something has to give. One of the things we propose just to kind of get the ball rolling and put some ideas into the mix is to say, you know, you're hosting the G7, it's a matter of just a month away or so. Why don't you invite President Sheinbaum? You're allowed guests. She's on the. She have 2 trade agreements with Mexico. We've got to rekindle that relationship for some of the things we've had to deal with before. Invite her, and you know what? Have a little sidebar. The presidents of the 2 countries, Canada as Prime Minister, talking about where do we go from here. And our ask is just put the negotiators in the negotiating room. You know, David, if you look back at the history here, we had an auto pact. Then we had the free trade agreement. Then we had the North American Free Trade Agreement. Then we had the USMCA. We'll have something else. Yeah. There's no world in which we cannot have a trade agreement. So the sooner we get to that place, the better it'll be for consumers, the better it'll be for businesses, and we can get back to what we're supposed to be, which is a strong continent that's the best in the world that can compete with the rest of the world.
Okay, I just want to play a clip for the audience. We got some reaction from the U.S. President after today's meeting. He was asked why he hasn't referred to Mark Carney as governor like he did Justin Trudeau. Just have a listen to this.
As far as calling him Governor Carney, no, I haven't done that yet, and maybe I won't. I did have a lot of fun with Trudeau, but I think this is a big step up. It's a good step up for Canada. I watched very closely. I thought he did really terrifically in the debates. I like him. You know, he's a nice man. We get along very well. We had a great meeting today. Really good. I think the relationship's going to be very strong.
Okay, Goldie Hyder, you know, Donald Trump saying the relationship is going to be very strong. He watched the debates in the election, which was surprising to me today to hear that. I mean, you know, you mentioned the Mulroney Reagan era. I mean, that's not what this is. But this is the nicest I've heard Donald Trump talk about a Canadian leader in a long, long time, right?
Well, it allows us to turn the corner, turn the page, whatever you want to look in terms of analogy. One of the things we've been hearing down here, 2 things, right? The president says, I don't need Canada. With the greatest of respect, you need Canada. You do. You need our energy, you need our uranium, you need our potash, you need our critical minerals, where we work together in an integrated market for the last 5 decades on an auto sector. So we need each other. There should be no question about that. Second thing we picked up a lot down here, David, and you know, again, this is the thing about us being Canadian, is they go, you guys are horrible marketers of yourself. You need to do a better job communicating as Canadians, Canadian governments, Canadian businesses, Canadian premiers and others to say, here's all the things we do. You know, we talk a lot about China, for example. We've been pretty tough. You know, we pretty much matched their foreign investment process here called CFIUS. We've imposed tariffs on electrical vehicles, which has harmed our canola industry. We haven't sold beef into that market for over 5 years. You know, we're serious about that.
They've been in alignment with the U.S. essentially.
We're part of the
right?
Five Eyes. Like, we have to do a better job of that. We also have to talk about the things that we do in terms of America's economic security. All of those things that I just mentioned are critical for America's national security and economic security, and we're partners here. This is not to be treated any other differently. We share a continent, we're neighbors, and we're partners. So I think Canadians and Canadian businesses and Canadian governments just got to keep reminding people how this actually is down here.
Right. Well, you've been here for a couple of days, and you've been part of like a series of meetings. I mean, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, stopped in, as I understand it, yesterday for a little bit. I don't know what he said. Maybe you can tell me what he said. But also, you've been speaking with Republicans and cabinet officials, including the Treasury Secretary. So, I mean, what have you heard from Canadian officials since you've been here? But I guess more importantly, what are Republicans saying to you in the last couple of days?
Well, look, we were very fortunate that the timing worked out, that the Prime Minister was able to pop by for a quick meet and greet. And I will tell you, one of the things that happens when you walk into a meeting of the Business Council of Canada's chief executive is it hits you, and it hit him. This is the Canadian economy in a room, and how important it is to recognize that trade agreements were made for these businesses to do business, to hire people, to make goods, to make consumers get the things that they want. And I think it was a nice setup for him heading into it as a reminder that ultimately trade agreements are for businesses. We need to make sure that we create a process and a structure in which to get that. I think everybody's thinking time is their friend, and maybe it is if you're in politics. It's not if you're in business. Capital has no need to invest anywhere by nationality. It goes to where it can grow, and it goes to where it's welcome. So our view from the American side of things is, what comes next? Our question to them is, where are we going from here? You can't just keep repeat, and there's this kind of dark cloud hanging over what's going to come. Maybe that's their strategy, but it's unhelpful. All of our economies are slowing down. Unemployment could rise. And those are own goals for North America. We had booming economies if we could just keep going and getting out of our own way. That's going to happen in Canada now. We're going to start talking more about what we can do to strengthen Canada. But it begins with stabilizing the relationship with the United States.
But, you know, like, there's a lot of focus on the tone of that meeting in the White House. And yeah, it was friendly. You know, Donald Trump was friendly.
It beats all the alternatives, right?
But he was friendly in the way he was saying, I'm going to destroy your ability to have an auto sector by making it uneconomical and forcing it to come to my country, right? So the words were still menacing, right? Like, he said it won't make economic sense for Canada to build vehicles, right? I mean, that is, if you're from Windsor all the way up to Durham region, that's a big part of your local economy. So the tone may be friendly, and he may be saying nice things about the Prime Minister, but his intentions are still a threat to the economic well-being of many Canadians.
Let me use the opportunity to kind of put the other perspective on the table, because it is important to understand what they tell us they're trying to do. These are people who are looking out for their own interests. They believe they need to reindustrialize America. They feel that the U.S. dollar has been manipulated as the global currency. Everybody lowers their currencies, and they end up making things that should be made in America. Now, America's economy for manufacturing is like less than 30%.
Yeah.
You know, 70% of it is services.
And it's the number one sector people leave voluntarily in the U.S. economy. They don't want to work in those jobs.
But for them, it's the politics of the moment, right? The coasts have done well, middle America's hollowed out. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but it's important to hear and understand what they're trying to do. And then they have said, we're going to make sure that we address the fact that we have too much deficit and too much debt. And you know how this is all going to end for Americans ultimately? It's a backdoor VAT. It's a backdoor GST. Even if they all settle at 10% one day, those are Americans paying more for things at a rate of 10%, which we have a GST at 5. They're going to have it at 10. But the sooner we get to that place, the better, because the uncertainty, on again, off again, it's 25, it's Kusma exempt, it's 15, it's 10. That has created capital chill and also capital flight, because there are other countries out in the world who are saying, bring your money here.
But, you know, until he drops this notion of, you know, Stellantis is restructuring its labor flows again today, right, in Windsor, like more shifts going off, more hours being reduced, more jobs put in a precarious position. General Motors on the U.S. side said the tariff's going to cost them $4 to $5 billion this year. So there is still, you know, maybe they'll get to a point where they have essentially a border GST in the form of a tariff that helps them with their financial problems. But they can lay economic waste to a key sector of the Canadian economy if they do this, right? So were Republicans aware of that when they were talking to you?
But it's so hard to disentangle an industry that's been built over 5 decades where they're, and by the way, let's hypothetically say, sure, you want to move a plant to America. You need time to find the place.
Yep.
You need to go through the regulations and the permitting. But you know what the biggest catch is? They don't have labor.
Well,
They have no labor to build anything.
Yeah, it's like 19th century trade policy pursuing 20th century industrial policy when the U.S. is turning into a 21st century economy, right?
Something's got to give, and our message is you've got a good thing going here in the USMCA. It's your deal. You called it the greatest deal of all time. As I keep saying, it was so good the Democratic administration kept it. Why are we not talking about how to review it and extend it? And I do believe the people I meet with who are running the process, the USTR, their trade representative, are doing exactly that. And the best example of that was on April 2nd. Everything that's CUSMA compliant or USMCA compliant was exempt from tariffs. That validates the USMCA itself.
So just a final question, because I got to get to the panel. There's officials are going to start talking over the next couple of weeks. I guess we may see what the negotiating teams are and see how that fleshes out as they get the cabinet and everything ready as well. Then it sounds like the next face-to-face meeting is going to be mid-June in Kananaskis, the 15th to the 17th. What needs to happen between now and then on all of this, do you think, in this relationship?
I think we have to have something coming out of today, ultimately, that says something's different between now and then. It can't just be more social media posts or more rhetoric.
Like actual process.
Something that says, and I'm meeting with the USTR tomorrow, and our goal is to say, what do we need to do to bring the partners to the table? I keep putting, we keep putting out this idea that G7 is an opportunity. There's a lot going on there, but why not just use that moment to bring the President of Mexico up, have a sidebar, and instruct your negotiators to go to the table, and let's stop talking about it in the news and start doing the heavy lifting of getting a trade deal done again.
Okay, Goldie Hyder, good to see you. That's Goldie Hyder, President of the Business Council of Canada. Well, before their closed-door talks, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump appeared to show some disagreement about the Canada-U.S. relationship. Have a listen.
Well, we don't do much business with Canada from our standpoint. They do a lot of business with us. We're at like 4%.
What's your position, Mark? 51st state. If Canadians don't want it, would you respect that?
Sure, I would. But this is not necessarily a one-day deal. This is over a period of time they have to make that decision. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. If respectfully, Canadians' view on this is not going to change on the 51st state. Secondly, we are the largest client of the United States in the totality of all the goods. So we are the largest client of the United States. We have a tremendous auto sector between the two of us, and the changes that made have been helpful. 50% of a car that comes from Canada is American. That's not like anywhere else in the world. And to your question about is there one thing? No, this is a bigger discussion.
Now, after today's meeting, Prime Minister Mark Carney called the talks constructive and wide-ranging. Carney was also asked further about the 51st state comments.
And really today marked the end of the beginning of a process of the United States and Canada redefining that relationship of working together. The question is how we will cooperate in the future.
Have you asked the President to stop calling Canada the 51st state?
Yes. Today.
Okay, specifically, what did you ask him?
Exactly what you just said.
Okay, there's a lot happening today. We're going to bring in the power panel now. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And the CBC's Katie Simpson. Why, she's back with us as well. Michelle, let's start with you. I mean, what are your thoughts on how this is playing out back home? I mean, what did you make of where things stand on the Canada-U.S. relationship, at least at the leaders level, after this meeting today?
Well, I think the Prime Minister did a good job on Friday in his press conference, kind of laying expectations, saying very clearly, don't expect that white smoke of big solutions coming right away, that this is a start. And, I think many of us watching were probably holding our breath just to see how it would go in the Oval Office. And I thought that he comported himself exceptionally well. He made his points and he made his interventions when there was airtime for him to do so. And the points that he made were, I think, constructive and certainly also reinforced where Canada is and Canada's position. I thought that what I took from Mr. Trump was he kept trying to refer to us as we're always going to be friends, which is something new for him to be saying about Canada over the last little while. So that was interesting. And also an acknowledgement on the whole 51st state stuff. that it takes two to tango. And so, and he even acknowledged, I think, that it doesn't seem that there's a willing person on the other, a willing dance partner or something like that. So that acknowledgement, it's there. It's not going to stop him from saying anything. Is there anything in the world that stops him from saying anything about anything? Like he is who he is. And I think that the more that the more that people get irritated about it, and he knows that it kind of is a way to just get under Canadian skin, the probably more he enjoys it. I suspect that while it was a point that the Prime Minister made, there was far more important points as well to make with respect to our trade relationship, because it's been very clear in terms of our sovereignty.
Yeah, certainly he was trying to refocus it on the value of the relationship and how it's better for everyone when it's functional, because you amplify the benefits of it all. I want to just interrupt for the conversation for 1 second. A little bit of breaking news here. Has to do with the Conservatives, and they have chosen their interim leader. It's Andrew Scheer. He is the new interim leader of the official opposition. The Conservative Caucus met in Ottawa today for the first time since the election to make this choice, and the choice was necessary because, of course, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre lost his seat in last week's federal election. The leader of the official opposition must be a member of Parliament. And last week, Conservative MP Damien Carrick, who won re-election in the Alberta riding of Battle River Crowfoot, agreed to step aside so that Poilievre can run for that seat, thought to be one of the safest Conservative seats in Canada. Of course, that is in Alberta. So look, we'll have more on that throughout the show. We're going to talk to our reporters and talk about that later with the Power Panel. But Tim, get your thoughts on what happened there today. Mark Carney interjected sparingly, to reinforce key points on key moments, and in a way that sometimes either made Donald Trump laugh or agree with him. So he wasn't amping up the hostility. But I got to tell you, from my perch standing behind the couch where J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Howard Lutnick were sitting, the Canadian delegation was pure game face. They were not betraying their inner monologue at all, just being very stoic. Sorry, there's flies buzzing around my head, and staring straight ahead and just smiling when Trump looked at them or referenced them or said something, but you could not figure out how they were feeling at any given time.
Yeah, look, I think they showed incredible discipline, because in other circumstances, that would be very difficult. But I think they knew the brief well. They knew that going in there, they didn't want to react to anything that he instigated or agitated with. I think the Prime Minister, when given the opportunity, particularly his comment on Canada not being for sale, was well interjected, and I thought he played it smartly, talking about it being a real estate deal, of course connecting to Trump and something he knows. I thought Canada did well today. I was also pleased, I have to say, David, to have seen earlier in the day the leader of the Conservative Party, I guess he's that, and not the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, make the point that he wished Mark Carney luck. I think that was a good thing to see. It's important we have a face of Canadian unity. And the only other thing I'd add, I think Canadians looking at this at home tonight will say he handled it probably with a near pitch perfect tone. He wasn't being overly laudatory towards the Prime Minister. And as you pointed out, the word transformative can be interpreted in many ways. Doesn't always have to be positive. So I think Canadians will interpret it one way, and Mr. Trump and his ego will interpret it another.
Well, it has the benefit of being factually correct, no matter how you interpret it, which is an important thing when you're going to define the actions of this president in particular. Francoise, what are your thoughts on the big takeaway from today?
Well, I think from his last comments, President Trump seems to acknowledge the same things that we are seeing, that it went well today. And boy, was there many opportunity where it could have been so explosive. I've been on a special French news show since 11:30. And everybody was kind of holding their breath for when the Prime Minister would meet the President, just for the handshake. Imagine the drama that the whole country was living at that moment. And then when they'd be sitting in the Oval Office. And from the get-go, I was personally, I must say, impressed with Mark Carney's sense of humor. I don't know if you all recall, but the president started with a big story that we're supposed to learn something huge to take his own qualification, a huge news by the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, maybe Monday. And when Mark Carney just greeted the people and acknowledged that he was in the Oval Office, said, I'm on the edge of my seat, I burst out laughing, because this is somebody who's in control of the moment. And he did enough when President Trump went on the 51st state again, and he used his own analogy that Trump, and even if his team had practiced Mark Carney, and I heard through the grapevines that he had hours of practice of different scenarios on how he should react. Even if that is true, I think his team didn't need to do that, because he used the own words from the president, and I'm not so sure that his team was smart enough to practice him on that front, on the real estate front. And he talked about the owners being us Canadian electors, and how it was a big no. Anyway, I just thought he dosed it well. He dosed it at the right time. He answered so that we can have those headlines that our Prime Minister said no to becoming a 51st state. And I never thought that they would solve all the tariffs today. The work starts now, and we feel a certain amount of respect between the president, as much as this president can respect anybody. So that might bode well.
Katie, that was my first time in the Oval Office. And, while the tone and everything was friendlier, you could feel a real tension in there, like as the Canadians were kind of like leaning in every time the president would speak. Not, you've covered this guy and you've covered NAFTA, for a while. You never quite know where it's going to go, right? But it seems as though with the comments in the moment and since, that this kind of went okay, is certainly the takeaway. I mean, how do you read it?
Well, anytime I watch a world leader go into the Oval Office, I think everyone clenches every part of their body, because they just don't know which way it's going to go. Ever since what happened to Volodymyr Zelensky, that really changed the game when it came to these kinds of meetings, which Donald Trump would often make news in them, but never had they ever been that explosive. That, of course, would be a worst-case scenario for any world leader going in there. The thing is, the way that the Canadians had sort of set expectations going into the event, sort of framing this visit as a moment to reset and try to reshape the Canada-U.S. relationship, to help allow Mark Carney and Donald Trump to have some face time together, to get to know each other, even briefly, even if it's in behind closed door meeting for a couple of hours, just so they get a better sense of each other as a way to build a foundation. That seems to be the way everyone is talking about it, both the American side, Donald Trump offering extensive compliments to Mark Carney at a separate event later today. We know that Donald Trump can change his mind in a second, and at another event, the White House today, there's a third event going on at the White House, I believe, as we speak. Things can change really, really quickly, and he maintained that sort of respectful tone. So if that's what the Canadians were hoping to go in to accomplish, that has been established. But again, it does not mask the ongoing threat and existential threat that Donald Trump presents to Canada and the Canadian economy. And while the threats around the 51st state are things that really agitate and irritate Canadians and make them very upset, and they want to see that stop, the thing that is going to cause the deepest harm, the greatest pain, is this trade war. And Donald Trump openly saying, in order to build the American economy, he does not care if it comes at the expense of jobs from neighboring countries, even allies like Canada. He wants those auto jobs that are in places like Windsor, in southwestern Ontario, in Oshawa, and all of these communities where the auto sector and other manufacturing, plants really are what keep these communities thriving, keep these communities together. He wants those jobs in the United States, and that is his number one goal there. So while, yes, the tone was far more respectful, it's smiling as you're sort of delivering a punch to the Canadian economic gut, that kind of thing. Just because you're doing it with a smile on your face doesn't mean you're not doing it at all. So that's something to keep in mind there. But I don't think anyone was expecting anything to tangibly change on that front at all. Donald Trump is not just going to change his mind sort of in a day on his economic policy. He might change his mind on his opinion on someone, but he's not going to go in and say, okay, we have this great meeting, let's change this right now. It's the building blocks to a starting process to get back on track to deal with trade irritants.
Yeah, Michelle, I mean, the tone has changed, but the tariffs are still there. And the president, while it was friendlier, what he stated as his economic objectives were still pretty scary for, the key auto belt towns and that sector in the Canadian economy. So if this truly is a reset, with officials getting ready to meet and start having further conversations over the next couple of weeks, what tangibly needs to be done before the Prime Minister and the President see each other again, at the G7 in Kananaskis in the middle of June?
Well, they need a process. They need a process for people to start talking at the officials level and to be dealing with the different issues, the different irritants on both sides, or on all three sides, actually, including Mexico. I don't think anybody should have expected that the president, just because he likes somebody, is going to in any way back down from what he's been saying in terms of bringing jobs back to the United States and saying that he doesn't need anything from Canada. That's his position in terms of negotiation, and why would you weaken it going in? It's incumbent on the Canadian delegation, and I'm sure they did, to point out, as the Prime Minister said in the Oval, that we are their biggest client, between us and Mexico and China, that's where your goods are going. We are the people who are buying from you, and so while you don't want to ever tell him probably that it's not true what you're saying, but you could point out that there are some other facts in terms of just the quantity of goods, the number of jobs that are behind it, and dependent on that relationship actually continuing on. So, I think that there's going to be logjams. This is going to be a tough negotiation, and we do have some cards to play. And I think that it's very important that those are played, judiciously, but also that they are between officials. It's not something that's played out in public, because, I think that would kind of jeopardize our whole standing.
Right, so here I have a situation where the Prime Minister is in Washington trying to reset the Canada-U.S. relationship. And meanwhile, back home, Danielle Smith is taking steps to reset the Alberta-Canada relationship, it seems. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he was asked about, what's happening in Washington today, but he weighed in on a lot of things, and he had some criticism for the Alberta Premier, who said she will allow a referendum on Alberta separation if a petition gets enough signatures. Have a listen to what Doug Ford had to say here.
President Trump's tariffs, this guy drives me nuts. I just get wound up. What drives me nuts, you see this guy on TV, we don't need Canada. Really? I guess you don't need our high-grade nickel that they use 57% of their nickel to build their military, their aerospace, and manufacturing. Imagine if we never gave them our high-grade nickel. We have a prime minister down there, and he's going to be sitting down, and he's going to give it everything he can. This is a time to unite the country, not people saying, oh, I'm leaving the country, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. United we stand, divided we fall. And we have to be united Canada together to fight President Trump's tariff.
Tim, what do we make of this dynamic happening domestically while they try to deal with this enormous bilateral relationship? I mean, Smith has chosen a moment. She's lowered the threshold for the number of signatures you need to get a separation referendum going, and then she's laid out these demands, which are going to be tough for Mark Carney to meet. What do you make of these two things happening in parallel here?
Not helpful. Not helpful at all. I don't necessarily think it's helpful to Alberta from a broader brand perspective, a business perspective. Again, she seems to be playing to her base self-interests. Maybe she's hoping there's some angle there whereby Trump will exempt Alberta oil from, or look to make sure Alberta is not as penalized as the other countries. I know fellow First Ministers, as Doug Ford just expressed, are not happy with her. I mean, surely be to goodness if even Pierre Poilievre can come online and wish Mark Carney good luck. Danielle Smith can be part of Team Canada, but she'll like that dialogue. What I just said, oh, see, Ottawa's against us. So it's blatant self-interest trying to protect her own political and Alberta's economic interests, and I'm not sure it's going to work. She has had Jason Kenney come out and say that this is not the way to go, the former premier. You had Mark Carney, I think, in a Q&A with you all afterwards, make the point that Albertans are wise people, they can make a choice, but I know where I stand. It's these sort of silly games that are not constructive. And, if Trump is the negotiator that we're all describing him to be, one has to imagine that Alberta, as first interests, are not going to be his prime mover, taking advantage of circumstances are. I mean, this is the same person who thought that getting advice from Kevin O'Leary and Mar-a-Lago was a great thing. Anybody who's gone down to Florida to meet with Trump has ended up in a grinder. I'm not sure it's the way to go.
Well,
Clear enough for you, David?
Yeah. Look, I know Pierre Poilievre wished him luck, but it feels like that's bare minimum stuff, right? To wish the prime.
But he's not proposing a separation or allowing the conditions for a separation referendum, as Daniel Smith says she's not going to initiate it, but creating conditions where it could be.
Though he is running for a seat in Alberta now, so I'm curious to see what Mr. Poilievre has to say about this, right? But Françoise, I just wonder, wishing the Prime Minister luck in this moment, okay, but Daniel Smith coming out with this and throwing, a national unity conversation into the mix, because that feels like where this is going to go, right? Because 177,000 signatures, I think, is all it is. I think someone's going to be able to get that in Alberta. I mean, what do you make of this move and the dynamic it creates here?
I think it's a stupid move. I mean, usually it came from Quebec, but now we have to address the Alberta factor. I think she's missing a huge point. While she's throwing this type of horror story into the picture, she's forgetting that Trump is also attacking Alberta on the side way, because when he says we don't need their oil, instead of saying, yes, you do, because here's the real story, factual, let's go and see if we get enough signature to hold a referendum, instead of saying it's the whole country. A bit like the Prime Minister was saying today, it's not 13 economy, it's one economy. If one tumbles, the whole thing tumbles. So we need to unite, and in that sense, if I was an Albertan, I'd say to my Premier, hey, come on, wake up. That'll be for another time. Even in Quebec, our separatist movement kind of put it on the back burner because they realize that to threaten Canada has an impact on Quebec. So, I mean, if these guys who've been at it for decades and decades and decades can put it on the back burner, maybe Daniel Smith, unless it's just for a political gain. But, it's a dangerous game to play in this type of times.
Okay, so Katie, I wonder what you're watching for next. This is the final point here on the U.S. side of things, right? There is this hope, I think, in the Canadian business community that the economic pain and things will just eventually force Trump to capitulate here. Hope isn't a plan. I don't know. What are you watching for, on this side of the bilateral relationship?
So I'm going to take a step back to the bigger picture with Donald Trump's trade war right now. And the thing to watch is, are Americans going to start to feel real acute pain as a result of the 145% tariff on China? Is that going to, cause shortages of goods on store shelves? Is it going to make everyday items completely unaffordable for Americans? Is it going to upend daily life? And if that does come true, as experts have been expecting, because it's not the countries that pay the tariffs, while China, in some cases, some of the companies may want to try to absorb some of the shock because they want to continue to have access into the American market. Largely what happens is the importer has to pay the tariff and then pass the cost on to consumers. If Americans already, polls suggest Americans have a very low, they don't like tariffs. It's very low in terms of the opinion polls. It's
low tolerance for it.
That'd be the word. So I'll be curious to see if that element of the trade war expands into a broader push from everyday voters, maybe even Trump voters who like Trump through, all of his different sort of iterations and promises. If it gets them to a point where their lives are made more difficult, is there a broader push in the U.S. to get rid of tariffs, not just on China, but hey, maybe perhaps the tariffs that are causing some problems for our neighbors to the north on goods that, you know, some of the goods that they use for everyday life. That's one thing that I'm sort of looking for, because the expectations are that 145% tariff, we're going to start to see real sharp price increases, and some goods may not be on store shelves in the next few weeks. And so what happens there and Americans' perspectives on how the president is doing, that could shift. But remember, Donald Trump is a politician unlike any other. The traditional guardrails don't seem to hold him in. He has a really high tolerance for risk and blowback. So, you know, and he navigates his way through it and continues to push ahead. So that will be interesting to watch for now. But the other things I'm looking for are Canada specific, are his attack dogs, you know, his cabinet ministers who are particularly partisan, or cabinet secretaries, pardon me, who are particularly partisan. Are they going to get out and attack Canada and, you know, say that, you know, that Canada's been ripping the United States off and raise the concerns about the longstanding irritants in the trade relationship? I'll be looking for that. But the early sign, and I know it's early, until we don't know how the day is going to go until Donald Trump goes to bed. And as someone who covers the Trump. Sometimes a post on social media at 9:30 at night can ruin my life because I have to come back to work and change everything. But, so, like, until Donald Trump goes to bed, we don't really know how today went. So all the signs right now are that Donald Trump had a good meeting. At a separate event after the meeting with Carney, he talked about how it was a good meeting and how he's a step up from Trudeau, and how, you know, the positive things and compliments directed at Carney. That is what he's feeling in this moment. How does he feel 3 hours from now? How does he feel tomorrow? Until Donald Trump goes to bed, we don't know how the day went. That's really the type of power and the situation we are in this moment.
No, that is a very good point. And in this moment, we can be here talking about how the tone is different and this meeting looks like it went well. And over on Fox Business News, Peter Navarro or Howard Lutnick could be saying something completely different to this.
Exactly.
And who knows where it goes from there. Okay, we're going to pause this. Katie, I want to thank you for joining the Power Panel from outside the White House. We're going to let you go because I know you got other things to do for other shows on the network. But the rest of the Power Panel is going to stick around for some domestic news coming up.
I'll be taking over the parliamentary leadership duties of the caucus until Mr. Poilievre rejoins us in the House.
Okay, you heard it there. Andrew Scheer, the old leader, is the new interim leader of the official opposition. The Conservative caucus met today to debrief following the election where leader Pierre Poilievre lost his seat in the House of Commons. Ahead of that meeting, MPs, including Andrew Scheer, voiced their support for Poilievre.
Do you think that Mr. Poilievre should stay on as leader?
Oh yes, for sure. Because obviously we lost, but on the other hand, we grew up. We grew up in the popular vote. We grew up as member of parliament. There is 24 new members. You have to learn their names. It's a big challenge, but a good one. And also we grew up in Ontario and in Quebec.
Everyone is very supportive. We're behind Pierre Poilievre. And, you know, obviously as he said, we have some lessons to learn from the campaign. We're gonna have those conversations in caucus today.
I'm confident that our leader Pierre Poilievre will be able to make some adjustments to finish the job next time.
Okay, to break down where the Conservatives stand, we're going to turn to the CBC's Kate McKenna, who is in Ottawa. So, Kate, caucus broke this hour? Probably not a surprise. Andrew Scheer is going to be the interim opposition leader. What else did he have to say today?
Yeah, it was basically flagged, you know, since the day after the election that Andrew Scheer was likely to take on this position. And of course, he has a very unique resume that's well suited for taking on this sort of short-term employment. He confirmed he'll be taking over duties as the opposition leader in the House of Commons, of course, because Pierre Poilievre doesn't currently have a seat in the House of Commons. And this is something that's only expected to last a few months, probably until the beginning of the fall sitting, at which time Pierre Poilievre probably will have regained a seat in the House of Commons. He's signaled that he's going to run in Damien Carrick's current seat in Alberta. Damien Carrick has said that he will resign his position. But David, this was a very long caucus meeting. It started at 9 o'clock this morning. It went all the way past the 5 o'clock hour. And MPs went in saying, you know, this is an opportunity to talk about what they did right, and they're quick to talk about what did go well for them in this election, that they did make gains, particularly in Ontario, in BC, moderate gains in Quebec, and that they're happy with the percentage of the vote that they got. But, you know, there are some concerns about the direction that the party is going in, and this was supposed to be an opportunity for the MPs to talk about that, to air their grievances, to talk about the path forward. But privately and publicly, I am hearing from Caucus widespread support for Pierre Poilievre to stay on as leader at this time. The question will be, you know, will he be making tweaks to his team? Will he be making tweaks in the OLO and in his parliamentary office? It's not clear at this point whether or not that came up or to what extent it came up, because it only broke less than an hour ago, so I'm still texting my sources. But these were the things that were expected to be talked about today.
Okay, let's just talk a little bit about that, because, you know, there are the public declarations of support. I mean, they were on track to win this historic majority, and then they didn't, and the leader didn't even win his seat. So there has been some grumbling, even though there is a silver lining in this dark cloud for them. I mean, what have MPs been saying to you away from the cameras in those more private and maybe more blunt conversations, Kate?
Well, I would say as of last Thursday or so, something kicked in where they realized that they lost the election, that they did not win the election. And then there were some more critical conversations that were had about the Pierre Poilievre's team specifically, and we've talked about this on the show, campaign director Jenny Byrne, and whether or not she's the right person to continue in a senior advisory role in Pierre Poilievre's team. There has been some reporting about some tensions between her and some progressive conservative premiers, including Tim Houston and Doug Ford, and then also in the newspapers this morning, some concerns about some of the organizational elements of the campaign. I will tell you that since caucus broke, I have been texting with some MPs who describe it as a very good meeting, a productive meeting, shy on specifics. Of course, we know that MPs aren't supposed to talk about what happens in caucus, but sources have confirmed that they did adopt the Reform Act, which is something that caucuses vote on in their first meeting after an election, and it gives caucuses more power. Famously, it gave the Conservative caucus the power to turf Aaron O'Toole, one of their former leaders in the past. I'm told not to read into that, that they have some plan to try and get rid of Pierre Poilievre, as I've mentioned, as others have said. At this time, there seems to be widespread support for Pierre Poilievre among caucus. He will face some challenges coming up, though. For instance, there is a mandatory leadership review when the party loses an election, and that's set to happen at convention, which I believe is set to happen next spring.
Okay. Kate, thanks very much. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Ottawa. We're going to bring in the power panel to talk about the latest on the Conservatives as they meet for the first time since losing the election. Michelle Cadario, Tim Powers, and Francoise Boivin are still with us.
Thank you.
Tim,
Have a good
what
show.
do you make of this? What do you make of this, Tim? You know, Andrew Scheer, leader in the 2019 election, kind of forced out after his loss, and now back as the interim leader of the opposition until Pierre Poilievre presumably wins this Alberta seat.
You know, I feel like you're setting me up a little bit, because we had this conversation on air on Friday. But David, because we're Newfoundlanders, I'll play along. I think it is outstanding. Wait, no. I think, look, it's an interesting choice. Mr. Scheer was roundly rejected by the Canadian electorate in 2019. He did not leave in the most wonderful way from the party. However, I think he's been put in there because he's seen as a loyalist of Pierre Poilievre. He has some parliamentary experience. One hopes he will exercise more judgment than he's shown recently in terms of the approach and the mood of the moment. I do think the Conservatives missed an opportunity to have what I'd call a Rona Ambrose moment, which I know is a concern of some in the Poilievre team. By that I mean electing somebody who would bring a different style and approach to the moment, and perhaps would be seen more favorably in the eyes of the public, hadn't had a verdict rendered on them. There was some jealousy when Ms. Ambrose was the opposition leader about what a good job she was and how it outshone others. So it's unfortunate they didn't go down that path. Hopefully Mr. Scheer will, perform as well as he can and not get the Conservatives in further troubles. I think the most fascinating thing, though, David, is what Kate said at the end, the Reform Act. And I think Kate's right in her description, Kate McKenna is right in her description, that it isn't there now to be used, but the fact that it is there and it has been accepted is an important counterbalance that the caucus can keep should things not proceed as they would like to see them proceed. Yes, there is support from Mr. Poilievre, but I don't think it's a certainty yet that he will be the leader come next election time. And the caucus now has created a vehicle to make sure that if Mr. Poilievre doesn't atone, doesn't do the things, some of the things which he said he would do today, to be fair to him, you know, he's going to listen more, he's going to try and enhance his team. But the caucus has given itself some power. That's probably the bigger news of today.
Yeah, Francoise, I don't know if their adoption of the Reform Act should be seen as a sign of, you know, another coup potentially coming.
Yeah,
I think
not.
This is just a feature, not a bug for the Conservative caucus, at least in its current form. But, you know, Mr. Poilievre didn't really address the issue of Jenny Byrne, Francoise. And so it sounds like, you know, this is still a potential flashpoint with some of the MPs he has, particularly, you know, the more moderates and maybe those in Ontario and in Nova Scotia. What are your thoughts on where things stand today?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about what's going to happen to Jenny Byrne, but usually people have to find a scapegoat, so she might be it. Because you can, on one hand, claim victory over the fact that you have more MPs, that you have now over 41% of the popular vote, and so on and so forth, and that's exceptional, and I agree with all of that. And then say, well, you failed. Where they failed is that they didn't win. And I think there is a sense of deception, rightfully so, in a sense that for the last 2 years, these Conservatives could smell it to a point that they all agreed to follow a thin line behind their leader, Pierre Poilievre. And it was funny for me to hear the voice of guys I have not heard of in a while, like Deltel. You never saw him. I mean, he used to avoid all reporters because they couldn't talk. And today, everybody can go fast enough in front of the CBC mic, which I thought they were boycotting. But anyway, more power to us. And that shows that they realize they have to change a few things. And people might be a bit more loose. But the fact that they adopt the Reform Act, the Michael Chong Act, which I call, every political party in the House has to decide if they do or not. I doubt that the NDP, Liberal, or Bloc would, they haven't done it before. But for the Conservative, especially the Conservatives of Pierre Poilievre, it would have been strange that they didn't adopt. And the fact that they adopted doesn't mean to me that it's still not Pierre Poilievre's party. He's going to be elected real quick, and that's why it's Andrew Scheer there, by the way, because Andrew Scheer is the least threatening to Pierre Poilievre in that job, and that's how I perceived it.
Yeah.
I could have bet my life that it would have been him at the end of the day.
Well, Michelle, it is interesting. It is like we went through a wormhole on April 28th because we've had Conservative MPs on the show daily, and we're struggling now to get a Liberal to come on. I don't know what to make of that, but you talk to the Conservative MPs, and they do say, like, they're tired of being told they can't talk to the media, they couldn't do debates during the campaign, they couldn't promote themselves, you know, as politicians, and it seems like at least that is going to change, but the overall philosophy and direction of the party, Andrew Scheer stepping in for Pierre Poilievre till he comes back, sounds like they're going to continue in the same vein, at least for now.
Well, it does sound like that. And is he still American? That's, you know, I don't know if that's been completely resolved either.
I can ask someone here before I leave, but I don't think he has gotten rid of his citizenship yet.
So that's quite curious to have the. Anyways, I'm going to leave that aside. I think that Pierre Poilievre has an interesting option right now. Particularly, he's going to be running in a by-election in Alberta. And when we're going in a time when there's a lot of talk about Alberta separatism and, you know, Danielle Smith giving a long leash to some of her right, he has an opportunity to actually stand up for Canada and to, you know, these are his base too. And it's a really, you know, it'll be interesting to see how he positions himself in his by-election, because I'm sure he's going to be asked on this bigger position. Like, will he stand up to the moment? I'm actually quite surprised that they're taking on that kind of a leadership test in this time. I'm not sure that they knew what Danielle Smith's, you know, how she was going to announce this before they chose the riding. But it could be, you know, he's going to win the riding, but it could be there could be a lot of news coming out of it, let's just say.
Yeah, no, certainly is it's an issue. Tim, just quickly, in about 30 seconds, I mean, how do you address that if you're Pierre Poilievre? I mean, you do have a roadmap laid out for a sovereignty referendum or a separation referendum in Alberta, you know, within the next 12 months or so, based on the standards that have been set, the issue set that's out there, and the pledge that the Premier has made. So if you're Pierre Poilievre and you're not an Ottawa suburban MP anymore, you're a rural Alberta MP, what do you say about this issue?
Well, he should adhere to the old line that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Do what Mark Carney did in borrowing some of the Conservative policies. Take the line the Prime Minister himself used in Washington today and say, you know what, I'm an Albertan, but I have a different view on that. And if it came forward, my position would be clear. And I think that is a good place for Mr. Poilievre to stand. It will also do him well, David, with his Ontario caucus, which is bigger than his Alberta caucus, and his Atlantic caucus, which he now also has to manage.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you all for being here with me. Tim Powers, Michelle Cadario, and Françoise Boivin. All right, more coverage here from Washington, where Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump sat down in the Oval Office for the first time today. The Prime Minister called it a constructive conversation and said the two men have agreed to have further discussions in the weeks ahead. President Trump emphasized wanting to maintain his friendship with Canada today as well.
This is very friendly. We're not. This is not going to be like we had another little blow up with somebody else. That was a much different. This is a very friendly conversation.
Okay, the blow up that President Trump was referring to there was he was talking about the heated Oval Office meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky back in February. For more on what happened today, though, we're joined now by Massachusetts Democratic Representative Seth Moulton. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here, sir. We met after that meeting with Zelensky. I mean, you called it an embarrassment to American history. None of that drama today. How would you describe what seems to have happened between the Prime Minister and the President today?
Well, I think everyone holds their breath for White House meetings now, and this was pretty good. We've gone from attacking our allies to just making smug comments. It's still a bit embarrassing as an American, but it's a lot better than what we saw with Zelensky.
You know, the tone was friendly, but he's still talking about making it economically impossible for Canada to sustain an auto sector. He's still talking about how really it's a much better deal if we all just join you here and become the 51st state. I mean, how do you interpret the friendly tone, the praise from Mark Carney as an individual, but still these aggressive views on what he wants for the bilateral relationship?
I mean, look, the problem is you can't trust Trump because he's just not a trustworthy person. We know that he lies all the time. But it's also just not clear what his strategy is. And I hear this from fellow members of Congress who are on the other side of the aisle, from Republicans, who say, I don't really know, is he pursuing these tariffs for a long-term plan to restore American manufacturing? This is what it sounds like when he talks about enduring some pain for a little while only to get businesses to come back home. Or is he just doing this as a short-term negotiating strategy? It's one or the other, right? You're not going to get factories back if it's just a short-term negotiating strategy. So we really don't know what the plan is. And I think increasingly Trump clearly does not understand how this is going to hurt us in America. And once that starts hitting home, we might see a different approach to the tariffs.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? Like, because it is being defended as either a visionary transformational plan or a purely transactional leverage play, and those are contradictory. We're seeing disruption in our auto sector in Canada, right? Stellantis has you know, and I believe it's General Motors in Oshawa. We're seeing, you know, hours of work being lost, shifts being shut down, and layoffs in some cases. What is it going to, you know, I've seen General Motors put out a statement saying the tariffs on this side of the border will cost them $5 billion.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. So what is the evidence of the pain moving through the supply chain in the United States that may catch the president's attention at this point?
Well, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's very early. And a lot of these numbers that are being thrown around now haven't really hit home in terms of jobs lost, in terms of prices skyrocketing for autos. You can go to, you know, I think you can go buy an auto today, the price hasn't changed that much, but everyone's anticipating them to go up a lot. So it might take some time for Trump to realize his pain. But remember, Trump's also very good at backtracking and changing his mind and completely, you know, just pretending that he had this idea all along. So we could see a full reversal on tariffs. Understand, I'm not predicting that. I can't predict the mind of Donald Trump.
I hear you.
But anything is possible at this point, and that's just kind of what people have to be prepared for.
Well, he was asked that today. One of the journalists said, is there anything that Mark Carney can say to you today to get you to drop the tariffs against Canada? He said, no. And they said, why not? He goes, that's just the way it is. And it sort of just ended there, right? So the tone is better, but the tariffs are still in place. And the economic uncertainty and damage is still sort of rippling on both sides of the border. So they're going to have more talks. Officials are going to start talking to try to reset the rules of the trade relationship like we did the last time he was president. And then they'll meet again at the G7 next month. I mean, what do you hope to see between now and the 15th of June?
I just hope to see some realism from the administration, some recognition of how this is going to impact the very workers that Trump claims to be supporting. Obviously, he's listening to his friends on Wall Street. He's already walked back some of the tariffs in response to feedback from the street. But this is really going to hurt the American people, too. And that has not hit home yet for the president.
Where are your Republican colleagues on this? Because, we've talked to a lot of Democrats and some Republicans on our show about this. And, one of the Republicans we had on said that people were being emotional, the markets were being emotional. You just got to give it time and trust in President Trump, which is a difficult thing to do when you're Canada. But where are, the members of the House, the members of the Senate in terms of trying to take back their constitutional control over tariff and trade policy and down tools in this trade war?
I mean, David, have you ever seen a dog fixated on a bone and you move it around? And that's the Republicans following Donald Trump. As he goes from one position to the other, they just support him. And it's not fulfilling their constitutional duty in Congress. It's not upholding the oath that they took to make sure they're representing their people and not just being subservient to a president. The reality is Republicans are just following Trump right now, and I don't know what it's going to take for them to start doing their job.
I wonder, though, you say the economic damage is not being felt yet, but like 3 to 6 months is kind of a lag. You see a lot of people predicting of where it will go. And you are seeing, this is very granular kind of trade data, but you're seeing containers coming back from China empty. Ships are going over to bring things over because of the tariffs. They're coming back without goods to bring in. Eventually, the ships are just going to stop going. And there is going to be scarcity, and there's the inputs for your manufacturing sector are just not going to be there. And so the outputs won't happen. I mean, by the end of the summer, there's real potential for the sectors and the people the president says he wants to help. They could be really feeling some significant economic pain.
This is the first time in history I think we've had a major recession caused by one man, but that's what we're headed for.
As a choice, right?
now. As a choice, because he just doesn't understand basic economics.
They're going to renegotiate the trade deal, though, it seems. Like this is the start of it. This is how Mark Carney described it today, that they began the process of renegotiating that particular arrangement. Look, Canada obviously has some things they're going to want changed, and Trump has some things he's going to want changed. Aside from what the president is trying to do on that trade relationship, what do you and your Democratic colleagues think needs to change in the Canada-U.S. relationship? There are always irritants within the normal scope of irritants. What are some of the things you hope gets done there outside of the bigger things that Trump is dealing with here?
Look, I'm the exact opposite of Trump. I want to see more trade with our northern partner. I think that we have complementary economies that when Canada does well, America does well too. He takes a very zero-sum approach to this, that America is doing bad if other countries are doing well, including our allies. I just totally disagree with that. So I would like to see stronger trade deals, not weaker ones.
The president, though, was throwing numbers on the table today. We're subsidizing Canada to $200 billion a year, sort of lumping, the gap in our military spending on the NATO target in with currency exchange, in with trade deficits. So you're not dealing from like a common understanding of things, right? And I just wonder, has the American public completely bought that argument? Howard Lutnick said yesterday that we're a socialist country feeding off America. Is that the view, do you think, in the broader American landscape right now of how Canada is functioning as a trade partner, as a defense partner?
Well, I think what you have to understand is that there are a lot of Americans who are just very frustrated with the economy, because the economy is doing very well for people on Wall Street, not so well if you're working in a factory and trying to see your wages go up, and instead what you see is prices going up at the grocery store. So it's important to acknowledge that Americans are frustrated. I don't know if they buy the president's explanation. Some of them clearly do. But that will change as they see the real results of this trade war, which I don't think are going to be good for American workers at the end of the day.
The focus has really been on tariffs and trade because of the immediate shock that represents to the economic well-being of both countries. But there is a larger conversation happening, too, about the security and defense relationship. And with NORAD and with NATO and with what's happening in the Arctic right now, I mean, there's significant short, medium, and long-term strategic and geopolitical issues at stake for both of our countries. You know, Canada is talking about moving on to buying more military hardware from European suppliers instead of American suppliers, because when someone's talking about absorbing your country, how can you buy their military hardware, right? So, I mean, what's the level of concern inside Congress and inside the Senate on that particular level of disruption, or is the focus just overwhelmingly on the economic side right now?
Well, I think the focus is more on the economic side, but obviously there is this discussion focused more on Europe, on what role NATO members will play and how they're going to step up. Everyone in America wants NATO to do more. I think it's really short-sighted to try to distance ourselves from NATO, to try to push responsibility on our partners so much so that they don't buy American weapons, for example. That's not going to help America in the long term. But look, just think about this. The single greatest threat that we face as the United States of America, at the end of the day, is a nuclear attack from Russia or China. Those missiles are going to come over Canada, right? Canada might be the first to see that this defense partnership that we have had for a long time is important for American national security. It's not just about what happens in Europe with NATO, it's about U.S. national security. And that's why there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, Democrats in public, but Republicans in private, because they're too scared to say it publicly, who absolutely support NATO, want to see NATO strengthened. Want to see more contributions from our partners, but also want to see us continuing to work hand in hand on defense against adversaries like Russia and China and Iran, North Korea, other countries around the globe that frankly wish us ill will. So,
Congressman, just as a final question, I mean, it sounds like the relationship might be in a better place, at least tonally, and on the leader-to-leader basis, and that's not nothing. And, you know, the interpersonal dynamic is going to matter with a president like Trump, I would argue. What do you hope to see? What are you watching for over the next couple of weeks to see that there really is change and that maybe things can move for the better?
Look, Donald Trump is very transactional, but he's also very personal, right? And that means that the relationship that these two men have is important. I think the Prime Minister did a really good job of furthering that relationship today.
Okay. Congressman, really good to be in person. Thanks so much. That's a Democratic Congressman, Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, joining me here today. Okay, coming up, Ontario's representative in Washington, David Patterson, on what he makes of this first meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump. We'll be back right after this break. Prime Minister Mark Carney described his first meeting with President Donald Trump as very constructive, making it clear that Carney raised the competitiveness of the North American auto sector.
So we will continue to press that case and look for an arrangement that takes full advantage of it for the benefit of the United States, but of course, from our perspective, very much for the benefit of Canada.
Just this morning, the Stellantis plant in Windsor announced there would be less work for the next 12 weeks. The latest amid a series of scalebacks in Ontario's auto sector following U.S. tariffs. Premier Doug Ford says the meeting between the world leaders was a crucial first step.
I thought he did really well. It was very productive. He held his own. I'll tell you, it's very obvious that President Trump likes Prime Minister Carney a lot more than he liked Prime Minister Trudeau.
But as thousands of Ontario auto workers brace for more changes, the president says he's firm on his auto plan.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. And we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars.
David Patterson is Ontario's representative here in Washington, and he joins me now. David Patterson, it's good to see you in person. Thanks for being here, sir.
Welcome back to Washington.
What's your read on today? Was it a good day for Canada? Because the president was friendlier, but he's still saying, I want your auto sector, and I wouldn't mind you being a state.
Yeah, it's a great start for the new federal government. It's great to have them back here and on the trade file. We've been trying to hold up the walls here for the last several months, and since Premier Ford came down here and making some projects, trying to chip away at progress, trying to chip away at some of the tariffs, and we have made some progress, but it's really important to get the federal government back and into a process, and today was the start of that, which is great news.
Just what do you make of the dynamic between the two leaders? Like, I know it's about negotiating teams and cabinet officials on both sides of the border, but the interpersonal dynamic, it does matter, especially with a president as transactional as Donald Trump. What did you make of what you saw between Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump today?
Yeah, I think it was very good. It was respectful, and it bodes well for where we're going. And that dynamic is very important. We've seen it with Premier Ford and Lutnick. That's been an important relationship, and we build on all those types of progress as we go forward. But I think from the point of view of the provinces, this was great. We really appreciated as well how the Prime Minister brought forward the building of the relationship based on, for instance, spending on our military.
Yeah.
That was a insistence of all the premiers that we meet our NATO spending, and he led with that, and I think that broadened up the meeting and showed that this is a two-way relationship.
Yeah, he praised Donald Trump for rejuvenating or reinvigorating the conversation around security and national defense, and called him transformational, which is an accurate description. It depends on how you view the transformations, because one of the things he wants to do is transform the auto sector, right? He said today, we don't need cars from Canada. He says, he's going to conduct himself in a way that it doesn't make economic sense to keep making cars in Canada. What does that tell you about the ability to negotiate on auto tariffs?
Well, we've been hearing that for months, and yet at the same time, we've made really important progress. At the same time, one of the things they talked about was the importance of USMCA compliance, and that principle has allowed us to find ways for our businesses to work past the fentanyl tariffs, for example.
Right.
We have a zero tariff on parts. We worked very hard on that here. And we have a lower tariff on automobiles than others, but we need to get it back to zero. And until we can do that, we're still going to have a lot of this volatility. So I was there at General Motors when that plant closed. The first thing you do after that is you get it back open again, and you get it back to 3 shifts, and I think we can do that again.
But the president is not saying, I want to make it uneconomical for Canada to make cars unless they're USMCA compliant. He just stops at making it uneconomical for Canada to make cars.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big dark line in the sand.
Yeah, but again, we've been making progress. That's the key point. And I think you make progress by being constructive and by engaging and by being here. And that has worked in terms of reducing some of the tariffs in a way that gives a very significant competitive relative advantage for Canada to the rest of the world. Now we need to build on that and build our way back. The President also talked about, and the Prime Minister today talked about the fact that they're going to be putting a 25% tariff on vehicles coming from outside of North America.
Right.
That creates about a 5 million vehicle opportunity within North America. There is not 5 million vehicles of opportunity in the U.S. system. So ultimately, we can step up and be part of that with our supply chain and with our factories.
Mark Carney said today in his press conference at the embassy that he sees this essentially as the start of the renegotiation of the trade relationship. Trump was far less specific on how he viewed this, like, oh yeah, USMCA, it's pretty good, maybe, maybe not. We have concepts is what we're talking about now. He seems to prefer the weaponization of tariffs as his approach to these things. But do you think this is headed to a continental trilateral conversation? Or are we headed to bilateral conversations on this one?
Well, I think we'll have a bit of both, actually. I think that there are problems that can be addressed and solved bilaterally, and I think we'll be in a period of doing that until we get into the USMCA renewal. I don't see us moving directly into that renewal, or I didn't see the sense of that in the meetings today. And I think that's okay if we take on some things like our national defense, if we take on the continuation of reduction of tariffs, and understand that we need each other. Take, for example, the big focus here is in China. And China is talking about turning off its critical mineral supply to U.S. military and U.S. industry. Well, we have that in Ontario, in the Ring of Fire. And so the project at home of getting projects moving quicker is directly related to how we solve problems here as well. Because behind the scenes, when you're here day to day and you're in the meetings,
right,
they know that they need us. We need to just continue on with that discussion.
So is this, are we headed to a formal trade renegotiation like we saw with NAFTA 2.0, where you have lead negotiators and you have bargaining teams, and Steve Verhoeven is leaned on to come back and help Canada again as a trade negotiator on this? Or are we headed into sort of like a barter-style negotiation to try to get to a level of appeasement, almost like with the fentanyl tariffs, with the border plan? I mean, which of these tracks do you think we're headed?
Well, I think the whole world is engaged in the latter at the moment, that this entire setup of the application of tariffs, keep in mind that on April 2nd, there were almost 100 countries received over a 50% tariff from the president. They brought that down to 10 to try and quell the market. We have a 0% tariff in Canada. And so again, we have a relative competitive advantage that we can work on as we move forward. But yes, it's a transactional president. I think there's no question about that. And frankly, it took us 2 years to negotiate the USMCA. We don't have 2 years to fix the problems that we have. So it's a good thing to get into fixing problems now. We're delighted to have the federal government back after the leadership and after the election to grab the baton and move forward, and we're going to be there to support them 100%.
So just as a final question, from Ontario's perspective, I know there were threats to cut off power, put export taxes on power. Are we out of the phase where the threats of retaliation are still on the table? I just wonder what your sense is. We might hear from Doug Ford after the First Minister's meeting tomorrow when they get an update on where things stand.
Well, really, for the first time in trade, the provinces have engaged, and we've never before had the proposal of either withdrawing certain things that we supply or putting a tariff on those. We always have that as a tool that we can use in the toolkit. And I'm very proud of Premier Ford for having been able to show that we have all kinds of options. It lasted 2 days, but it was the one thing that got attention in the White House.
All right, David Patterson, Ontario's representative here in Washington. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for your time today. All right, well, U.S. President Donald Trump repeated his wishes that Canada become the 51st state while meeting face-to-face with Prime Minister Mark Carney today.
I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. When you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said, that's the way it was meant to be. But, I do feel it's much better for Canada.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace, that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
But never say never. Never say never.
Okay. Though Trump says never say never to Canada's annexation, you can see Mark Carney there making his stance clear, mouthing the word never, I think 5 times at the end of that exchange. So here now to discuss what we saw today is Rhode Island Democratic Representative Seth Magaziner. Congressman, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here today, sir.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, I think the last time we spoke, you introduced the No Invading Allies Act in Congress. He's still talking about it, though he did say he didn't think, on Sunday in Meet the Press, the president said he didn't think military action would be required. Where do you think things are today after hearing what the president said in his meeting with the prime minister?
Well, I'm glad to hear the president softening at least somewhat as it relates to Canada and, taking military action off the table. And perhaps we're seeing, some backtracking from him on these tariffs, which would be a disaster for both countries. So that's a positive. But that being said, in the same Meet the Press interview, where the president said that he didn't envision military action against Canada, he refused to take it off the table when it came to Greenland. And obviously, any sort of military action against allies of the United States and allies of Canada in our own hemisphere would be profoundly destabilizing. So I'm glad to see the president softening his stance as it relates to Canada, at least somewhat. We still have more work to do there, but I'm going to continue to stay strong on this because the United States should not be invading any of our allies and certainly not in our own hemisphere.
Yeah, and Greenland, of course, in Canada, Greenland being a territory of Denmark, a founding member of NATO, Canada being a member of NATO, there's a whole bunch of implications if the president ever makes good sort of on the rhetoric there. He did seem friendlier with Prime Minister Carney today compared to when he was calling former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the governor of Canada. He hasn't moved off some of the more contentious policy goals, but rhetorically, it seemed an improvement. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the prime minister handled himself very well today. I think he was friendly, but also firm and confident. There does seem to be a softening in some of the rhetoric from President Trump, which is good. Again, still more work to do. I'm very much of the view that these tariffs do not serve the interest of the American people, certainly don't serve the interest of Canada either. We don't need higher prices on consumers right now. And I'd like to see more progress made on that, but I think today was a very good first step.
Well, the president stayed persistent today in his view that the United States does not need Canadian goods, don't need oil, don't need car, don't need lumber, don't need steel, don't need aluminum. With those sort of positions being put on the table, how do you see these trade talks going if they start from those beliefs as an opening position?
I don't think that President Trump has a coherent strategy, when it comes to tariffs. And you've seen, other nations who've tried to negotiate with President Trump on tariffs, the Japanese and others, come away frustrated because they don't really know what the president wants. And you have some in his administration saying that these tariffs are just a negotiating tactic to try to get better terms on trade deals. But then you have the president himself suggesting that they may be permanent and be a revenue replacement for the income tax. And so there's no coherent strategy or coherent, policy that I can glean from. What I do know is that in my state, in Rhode Island, we import Canadian electricity. We import Canadian stones to, help supply our jewelry manufacturing industry, which is a big industry in the part of the country that I come from. And I can give many other examples. So I don't see it as particularly helpful or constructive, but again, I'm glad to see the president backing off at least some of his more extreme plans, and hopefully that progress will continue.
It seems as though there is going to be a more formal process going forward. At least that's how I interpret what Prime Minister Carney had to say today, that officials are going to speak over the next couple of weeks, and then the leaders will meet again face-to-face in the middle of June when the president comes to Canada for the G7 summit in Kananaskis. What do you hope to see in that process over the coming weeks to show that maybe there is a de-escalation in this trade dispute?
Yeah, I hope to see a continued normalization, between the United States and Canada, and I hope that the administration will also listen to the American people, because in all of the public opinion polling, the American people do not like tariffs with Canada, do not like tariffs with Mexico, do not like the notion of trying to take over other countries, be they Canada or Greenland or Panama or any others. This just isn't what the American people want. There's China, I think, is a different case, and many of us support a tougher approach vis-a-vis China. But I just hope that the president and the administration will listen to the American people who want a return to normal when it comes to our relationship with Canada.
Do you feel better or worse about the state of Canada-U.S. relations today? Because I tell you, the anxiety levels in the Canadian government going into this, they felt that prepared. They felt they had a plan. They're trying to keep expectations low. The Prime Minister made a papal reference saying you won't see white smoke. We're not seeing black smoke coming out of the White House either, so that's a positive sign. But you know, the volatility of this had them worried. How do you interpret things after what appears to have been a reasonably successful first time face-to-face here?
Well, I think we're all feeling better than we were 24 hours ago. This is a situation that we never should have gotten ourselves into to begin with, but it is what it is, and I'm glad to see positive forward progress.
Rhode Island Democratic Representative Seth Magaziner, it's good to speak with you again, sir. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're going to take another break, but our journalist panel is here with their takes on today's big meeting at the White House. That's next.
When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, when you look at that beautiful formation, I do feel it's much better for Canada.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months. It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
The argument over Canadian sovereignty continued at the very heart of American power as Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump met face-to-face to try to reset the Canada-U.S. relationship. The president greeted the prime minister warmly for their first official meeting since Trump launched his trade war, disrupting the long-standing relationship between Canada and its closest partner. The tension is obvious, but their meeting began with kind words.
Really want to congratulate him. It was probably one of the greatest comebacks in the history of politics, and I think Canada chose a very talented person, a very good person.
The praise aside, Trump didn't back down on tariffs, repeating his claim the U.S. doesn't need anything from Canada.
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is.
Trump says the tariffs stay. Carney says so does the border. Public disagreement over Trump's belief that Canada should be the 51st state.
Well, I still believe that, but you know, takes two to tango, right?
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
But never say never. Never say never.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is saying never, and he is now leaving the U.S. Capitol after what he calls constructive talks, the beginning of a process of redefining the Canada-U.S. relationship.
This is the point at which a serious discussion begins. I look forward, not back, and I think we established a good basis today.
Okay, I want to bring in our panel of capital J journalists to see what caught their attention from the day's events. I'm joined by Marty Patrican, who is the Quebec correspondent for The Logic, journalist and author Paul Wells, and Shannon Proudfoot, who is with The Globe and Mail. Good to see you all. Marty, let's start with you. Let's kick off the discussion with your thoughts on what you saw happen here in Washington today.
There are a couple things. First of all, he didn't get Zelensky. Everybody was going to worry that he was going to get Zelensky and have, get tag teamed by him and J.D. Vance. That didn't happen. He sort of became part of the furniture, which is good. I looked at the transcript, and it was 5 full minutes of Trump bloviating before Carney got a word in. This is a guy who's a guest of honor in the White House. That tells you everything you need to know about Trump. But the interesting thing to me about what went down is the 51st statement. You know, Doug Ford wears the hat, says Canada's not for sale. Mark Carney repeated it during the meeting with Donald Trump. Canada's not for sale. I realized that we all have it wrong. We've had it wrong this whole time. It has nothing to do with Trump wanting to buy Canada. He thinks, in a couple of the statements that he said in there, one of which he played at the beginning, the two to tango thing that Trump said, he actually thinks that Canadians want to flock to the U.S. And he continues to think that we're secretly clamoring to get in the United States. And I put to you that is about as delusional as someone thinking that Alex Ovechkin is a Canadian hockey player, which he also said during that. But to be honest, I understand the optics are important and everything like that, but none of this really matters, because what matters is precedent. And the precedent in this situation is Trump blinks. Trump blinked on car parts. He's blinked on a number of those tariffs with a bunch of countries. He's in the process of blinking with China. And more importantly, with Canada, he has blinked on steel and aluminum in the past, and he's going to blink again. He talked specifically about steel and aluminum. Let's do a little factoid about aluminum. There are 4 aluminum smelters in the United States. There are 10 in Canada, 9 of which are in Quebec. It's been 50 years since the Americans have built a aluminum smelter in that country. It's not going to happen. So we have to realize and go and sort of cut through all of this and just realize facts and precedent. He has blinked before, and he will blink again.
Okay, well, we'll see. I hesitate, Shannon, to make any predictions when it comes to President Donald Trump. But what was your takeaway of how this went today, based on what Marty just laid out?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It would never be smart to bet against anything because everything seems possible with him. I have a bit of a different take on the 51st state thing. I thought I saw tons of evidence before now, but especially today. I really think it's a troll job. He is a finely attuned attention-seeking machine, and from the time he first mentioned the idea of Governor Justin Trudeau and the 51st state and erasing that line, he got endless amounts of attention. And it makes perfect sense why this freaks people out and angers them greatly. So it still feels to me like a troll job, like either that he's seeking attention or that it's part of a thumb on the scales of the negotiating tactics. I think I've mentioned on this show before that because I suffer for my art, I read The Art of the Deal and wrote about sort of how he approaches deal making. And one of the things he says that, of course, a lot of it's bloviating and showmanship, but one of the things he says that seems very true to me is that he starts from sort of an impossibly high negotiating tactic. Give me the sun, moon, and stars. And then if he ends up at some reasonable middle ground from there, he's still gotten more than he ever expected. And so if you start from a position of annexing Canada, then wherever he ends up is still going to give him a lot of what he wants. So that's, to be honest, it reads as performance art to me, but, of course, no safe bet with Donald Trump.
Yeah, Paul, it's a bit like personal injury law, isn't it? You make an outrageous demand in public and then you settle on the courthouse steps to avoid trial. Except, the stakes are a whole lot bigger in this situation. I wonder what are your thoughts on how this went today and Marty's assessment of the situation?
I'm left less sure today than I was, less sure at the end of the day than I was this morning why this trip happened. Through no fault of the Prime Minister's own, the President has received what he perceives as a never-ending succession of petitioners. He meets them at the door, he does a scrum with them in the Oval Office, and depending on his mood, it goes well or poorly. There's a lunch, they go home, the next day there's somebody else. And I think he started to free associate for several minutes because I think the President was bored to tears. I think here's another guy, wants another thing. He hasn't even listened close enough to understand that this guy doesn't particularly want much. Tomorrow he's going to be bragging about how Mark Carney came to kiss the ring. And it doesn't matter that much what Mark Carney came to do. There is, though, the question of what Canada thinks it's getting from these conversations, because the Prime Minister has said that he's turning the page on 60 years of progressive continentalization of our economy, even as he's saying he wants to renegotiate a fundamentally new relationship on the economy and security with the President. On the face of them, those are perfectly contradictory goals. I understand that you do sort of have to do both at once, but it's easier to do it with a deeply engaged counterpart on the other side. And instead, you've got a guy bragging about how he used to kick higher than all the other Rockettes or whatever the hell he was on about today. And
you're not far off.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what good he did.
Paul, is he just trying to assert some order and process in this? I mean, obviously the two had to meet face to face, right? Now that Carney has won an election, he's got an electoral mandate of his own. And, and he's not just the Prime Minister chosen by the Liberal Party, he was elected by Canadians. And he's got to try to bring some order to this. It seems like there's going to be a process of officials meetings and then, a meeting at the G7. Personal dynamics matter with a president like this? I mean, is it as simple as that? I don't know.
So I'm not one of these people who's shocked at the notion that he would go to Washington to meet President Trump or that it somehow debases Canada for him to do that. I think it's fine to check in with the guy. And to the extent you can, whether it's with the staff, the other people in the room, whether you can get some concrete advances on files, so much the better. It's just Trump wasn't into it today. Trump's got some fantastic announcement that's coming, and he really wanted to get people excited about that. And he's very upset about Gavin Newman's infrastructure projects in California. He sort of had to keep being reminded that the Prime Minister of Canada was in the room.
Yeah, he kept ranting about Biden, Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, Gavin Newscum, as he called him. By the way, I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes here, so if you see me at myself, that's what's going on. There's big television lights bringing the bugs in. So Shannon, I'm in a tricky spot. Mark Carney was in a bit of a tricky spot today. And what are your thoughts on how the Prime Minister handled this in the Oval Office?
Yeah, I think he was between a rock and a hard place today. I think this was a tricky needle for him to thread. I'm just going to keep abusing analogies here, if that's okay with everyone else on the panel. Because on one hand, he was, you could see him before he went and after in the press conference at the embassy, aggressively managing expectations. This is the first step in a long process. Don't expect any deliverables out of this. We're just trying to sort of build a relationship and start talking. But when you think about where Canadians have been emotionally and intellectually for the last few months, they want blood in the water. They wanted the guy to go to Washington and yell at the other guy. So he really, for a domestic audience, and I don't say this lightly, I don't mean in terms of showmanship. I think Canadians really wanted and needed to see from him that he had elbows up, as the saying went all through the campaign. But then if you think about the strategic goals of actually being there and talking to Trump, it's smart to kind of tread lightly and not sort of wake the sleeping beast and make him really angry. To Marty's point, to not get Zelensky'd, although I completely understand the point Marty's making there. I worry that gets a bit to like blame the victim, kind of blame the very classy, very brave victim who showed up and got humiliated through no fault of his own. So he had to kind of navigate between those two extremes. I think in a weird way, he was helped greatly by, as Marty said, Trump turning him into a piece of furniture and just talking and talking and talking. I think if my count of my transcript, the notes I made isn't wrong, he only actually spoke twice, where he managed to get a word in edgewise. And so in some cases that spared him responding to really kind of difficult topics where he might have gotten himself into a stickier position domestically. He managed, I think, to lay it on the line enough to say Canada's not for sale ever to satisfy Canadians. But I think this was a really delicate task he had before him and maybe kind of a thankless one. And to my eyes, he did about as well as he could have done, again, coming out of it with nothing specifically to show for, except, maybe not horrifying or angering Canadians.
Yeah. Marty, obviously, Trump dominated that in terms of time and volume and words spoken. And it seemed friendly, but there was a tension you could feel in there. I was standing right behind, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, and his Stephen Miller, his advisor. But Carney seemed in command of what he wanted to do. His interjections were sparse, pointed, like, I know elbows up, we think like hockey fight. But he had a level of self-control which allowed him some situational control, I thought, from my person there today.
For sure, and also, I mean, it sort of speaks to this thing, like that elbows up never really suited him. He did it the way he dances, kind of awkwardly. Him putting his elbows up wasn't particularly intimidating. I think you're right. I think being part of the, again, torture analogies. If you're part of the furniture, you're being completely almost anonymous. And it was similar to what Justin Trudeau pre-2019 felt with how you deal with Donald Trump. That is to say, let him talk, let him bloviate, let him do his show, and don't poke the bear. Shannon's right. I think I counted 3 interjections. Maybe it was 2. I'm not sure. Anyway, there was one thing that I thought that was really interesting, where he said, in real estate, there are some places that are never sale.
Never for sale
right now, and Trump was not only 2 things. He was laughing, and he said that's true. Little victories. The other thing, the final thing I'd say is that the extent to which Canada's relationship with the United States was based on the politics of personal enmity on the part of Donald Trump. He could not stand Justin Trudeau. He likes dealing with a gray banker. He doesn't want to deal with a guy who used to, go canoeing and wear sandals. I think that's. I think that alone is a small victory for Canada.
Well, Paul, he likes him until he doesn't, right? I mean, that's the way it goes with this president.
That's the way it always
what are
goes.
your thoughts on? What are your thoughts on how Carney conducted this today?
So I've been thinking a little bit about Mark Carney, because apparently we're going to be stuck with him for a while, and I got to do some journalism. It occurs to me that he used to be a hockey goalie. And the thing about the goalie is that most of what happens in the game happens before it gets to you. And you just have to watch closely and be ready. And to some extent, that was his function in the room today. He did skate out of the crease a little bit and make the points that he needed to make so that he could go home with some clips. But basically, his goal, his assigned task was to be ready if Trump pointed at him and ended a question with a question mark. And so I think it was a task that he's had a little bit more experience with. And the same thing you do as a central bank governor. You spend an awful lot of time with elected politicians, but all the fiscal stuff is their problem, and you're just dealing with the fallout from their choices. So it's a reactive role, and I think it prepared him as well as anything could have for the kind of job he had to do today.
Yeah, more of a Marty Brodeur dumping the puck out when they fire it in than a Billy Smith or Ron Hextall leaving the crease and
Ron,
looking
I was just
for a
going to use
fight.
Ron Hextall. Nice.
Yeah, there you go. I got to extend Paul Sport's metaphor because he's always bringing him to the table these days. Paul, you want to switch to the other guy, in the Canadian political drama of the last 5 weeks, and that's Pierre Poilievre and where he is in all of this. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, politics is more like prestige television. There's always a subplot somewhere. And meanwhile, while most of us were watching what was going on in the Oval Office, Pierre Poilievre was appearing in public for the first time since the election and appearing last night in a video that he put out with his wife, which was his direct message to his voters and his supporters. There's a lot of questions about Poilievre. He's absolutely right that he brought the Conservative Party to its largest share of popular vote since Brian Mulroney and its largest seat share since Stephen Harper. Pretty good day at the office, but it wasn't enough. And he now has to make some basic strategic choices about what to do next. So it's really interesting to see what he has to say. He was surprisingly affable and surprisingly not edgy and freaked out when a bunch of journalists accosted him and started asking him questions about the difficult couple of weeks he's had. Maybe he's learned that the constant phony war silliness doesn't serve him any more than it serves his interrogators. The most interesting thing I heard today was that he called Bruce Fanjoy, who's the guy who beat him in Carleton riding, at some point last week, and they had a conversation. I'm not sure the Pierre Poilievre of 5 months ago would ever have done that. So maybe one learns as one grows.
100%.
Shannon, what do you make of that? It was I am very happy to be in Washington, D.C. on a day like this, but it was a heck of a bad day to be out of Ottawa with all of that going on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the news needs to schedule itself better and spread itself out more so we can pay proper attention to all of it. Yeah, I share Paul's fascination with this moment for Pierre Poilievre. He is a formidable political athlete, but his way of doing that has always been to be 127% himself, to his detriment or to his gain. And I thought his speech on election night was fascinating because there were some sentiments in there that I've never heard from him before. I mean, first of all, and I say this I'm not being facetious at all, he talked about magnanimity and country first and said we will work with the Liberals and with the other parties to, make things happen to shore up Canada against these threats from the U.S. That's never been a gear he's chosen before. He coupled it with we'll still do our job as the opposition, as they well should. He's talked in that video that he put out yesterday, and I think again today, about learning and growing. As these things always are, the proof will be in the pudding, but he certainly seems to have had some sort of epiphany. A near miss that should have been a win will do that to you. But I'm really quite fascinated to see what this next chapter brings for him because, as Paul said, and I think Poilievre said it today himself, that if someone had said to him a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago, guess what, you'll get 41% of the popular vote, he would have said, great, I will take that. To whom do I owe some kind of cosmic favor? But it wasn't enough to get him there because of all the strange circumstances around it. So he's very clearly, and I thought that video yesterday was less thanking his supporters and his voters than it was an infomercial to the party and to the caucus that he's positioning this as a down payment. This is part one, part two is coming, we'll get there, but look how high we climbed now, just stick with me. And there hasn't been any serious expressions of frustration from within the caucus, although I think as we speak, they still meeting? They're not out yet, so we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, Marty, we got about 90 seconds left, but look, losing the national election, you can point to those results and say, circumstances, but look at the growth. Losing your own seat, though, that has to feel personal. And if that doesn't change you, nothing in politics will. What are your thoughts on where he is right now?
Yeah, and look, it's so intertwined. We know the persona of Pierre Poilievre because he effectively hasn't changed since 2004. He got contact lenses and got jacked up. But apart from that, there was a lot of his politics, or the way he conducts politics, has been pretty steady. This is the most humble I've ever seen him. And it reminded me again and again, the night that I watched the Tout le monde en parle show here at Radcan. the extent to which there's a side of Poilievre, not to pivot, I'd hate that word, but to see a side of him that wouldn't otherwise be seen. Someone who is willing to admit to mistakes, willing to work with others. I think if we had seen that version of Poilievre, he would have broken through. Just given the dynamics of the campaign. And again, I think it's a missed opportunity. And if by some chance this is indeed the direction the Conservative Party is going to go, it's a good thing for the country, certainly in this space that we're in right now, up against the United States and Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, it remains to be seen, right? I mean, certainly there's an immediate transition and a reflection on what happened. Change takes time, and it's got to be long-lasting for it to count. But look, we are already seeing Conservatives talking to media, MPs, coming on shows, and, speaking across perceived and real divides in a way that maybe is healthy for democracy and our understanding of our fellow Canadians. But that's just crazy talk as I sit here with the White House in the background.
You must be in Washington.
I know, exactly.
I'm
Drain
proud
that
of
swamp.
us not ending on a nihilistic.
We got to say goodbye because they're going to take the show. Marty Patrick and Paul Wells and Shannon Proudfoot, thank you so much. I'm David Cochrane in Washington. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. Hannah Mansing tonight is up next here on CBC News Network. I'll be back in Ottawa tomorrow. We'll see you at the regular time.